The Percy Jackson TV show on Disney Plus just released its 4th episode of Season 2, which is entitled Clarisse Blows Up Everything, and it's actually the title of Chapter 11 of the Sea of Monsters book. In a recent interview with Walker Scobell, Walker once mentioned that Episode 4 was his most favorite one.
Is it weird, though, like you've had this experience a few times when you're doing press, when you're already in the middle of something, like you're in the middle of Season 3 right now. So are you ready for both the holiday break, but also to get back to set? Because that's really where you're having fun, right? Making the show.
No, totally. I mean, even hearing you guys just now after Episode 4. Did you like Episode 4? That's my favorite episode, definitely, by far.
And I honestly can't blame him for saying that. I absolutely loved Episode 4, and in this video, I'll be going through this episode while giving my thoughts on it. If you want to get my thoughts on the previous episodes for the season, you can check out my Season 2 reviews playlist, which is linked down below. Last thing before getting into it, there will be spoilers after this, and with that, let's get started. Episode 4 starts with an interesting moment that was not from the book at all. We see Annabeth in this underground area, and you realize that this was actually a hideout that she used to go to with the demigods Castellan and Thalia Grace. Now, even if the scene never happened in the Sea of Monsters book, this is actually a really cool idea because it does align well with what we know about Thalia, Luke, and Annabeth's adventures while on the run from monsters. In the books, we learned that the three of them protected each other from monster attacks. And if I remember correctly, they did actually have safe houses or stashes like these to stay alive together. So seeing it here is really cool, especially since they actually showed a flashback with a young Annabeth Chase, Luke Castellan, and Thalia Grace. And I absolutely love this. So just a bit of behind the scenes trivia on these flashbacks, we actually got an interview about it with Leah Sava Jeffries, or Annabeth's actress, and Charlie Bushnell, or Luke's actor. They talked about the flashbacks, saying that these scenes were meant to deepen the story and understand Luke, Annabeth, and Thalia's history. These flashbacks took place a few years back, with Annabeth being 7 years old, Luke being around 14, and Thalia being 12. When talking about it, Leah mentioned how they had to hire another actress to play a younger version of Annabeth, who we actually saw in this episode. This actress is Marissa Leyor Winans, and she's actually Leah's cousin. Leah also talked about her cousin when they mentioned the flashbacks, saying that Marissa's acting was so on point for Annabeth. And I agree. I think Marissa managed to deliver pretty good scenes for the story. What's also interesting and kind of funny is that Charlie told us that there was no other younger actor for Luke, and that the Luke we see in the flashbacks was just Charlie himself. Charlie went on about this, saying that he played all the Luke scenes by himself, even if that meant he had to do a lot of crouching just to look younger in the flashbacks, which is honestly pretty hilarious. Now, going back to the episode, we see present-day Annabeth take a bracelet before we get our first flashback. This flashback shows a young Annabeth and Luke in this hideout, and Luke takes out a pack of family-sized monster donuts. When I saw this for the first time, I actually laughed because this is such a cool Easter egg from the book. And let me explain what happened in the book. After Percy, Annabeth, and Tyson escaped Luke's ship, they soon landed on an island. Once there, Percy wanted to talk to Annabeth privately, which is why he asked Tyson to go around and buy some donuts. Percy did not expect Tyson to actually get donuts because he just wanted to get Tyson away from there. So he got the shock of his life when Tyson arrived with the donuts. They realized that it came from a store called Monster Donut, and Annabeth soon deduced that it was a trap. Apparently, these stores were connected to a monster called a Hydra, which is a giant serpent with 9 heads. And when you cut one off, 2 more appear. What's also really cool about the Monster Donut packet we see with Luke over here is that you can actually see the Hydra as a cartoon right here. And I know, it's a pretty small moment in this episode, but it really referenced a lot already from the book. From this pack, we see Luke take out a bracelet, and he gives this to Annabeth as a token. This never happened in the book, but I like this idea. It's a sweet moment of Luke bonding with Annabeth, and it really solidified their close relationship. After this, we see our first look at Tamara Smart as Thalia Grace, and she looks incredible. Thalia walked over to them, and I can't really play the scene because of copyright, but the way she tells them to get into positions to prepare for a monster attack was very much the Thalia Grace I remember from the books. It really shows her leadership and authority over people, which is exactly what she would go on to have when she became the leader of the Hunters of Artemis. Going back though, Thalia, Luke, and Annabeth were bracing themselves for an incoming monster attack, and I love how Thalia used her spear and activated her bracelet shield Aegis to attack. This is because in the book, Thalia's main weapons were her spear and her shield Aegis. But just to note, Thalia's shield is just a replica of the real Aegis. The real one belongs to the goddess of wisdom and war, Athena, and it's a shield with the head of Medusa. Whenever Athena used it, anyone who looked into Medusa's eyes turned into stone, which is why everyone cowered in fear the second they see the shield. Since Thalia's shield is only a replica, it doesn't have the same stone powers, but it does evoke so much fear that people or monsters would just run away. As Thalia demands what their incoming monster wants, we realize that it wasn't the monster at all, and it's actually the satyr Grover Underwood. We learn in the first book and season of PJO that Grover was Annabeth, Luke, and Thalia's protector, as he was the satyr who brought them to camp. So seeing this moment when they first met Grover was honestly such a great moment for book readers like me. And speaking of this part of the plot, I want to talk about this, because the flashbacks tweaked up what we already know with Luke, Thalia, Annabeth, and Grover from the books. And let me explain. Throughout this episode, it's clear that Thalia and Luke did not want to go to Camp Half-Blood, and the books didn't have this idea at all. But the more that I think about it, it does add up, because around this time, Thalia and Luke hated the gods. They believed that their godly parents had abandoned them, so the show emphasized this by adding how they didn't want to go to camp because it was a place that the gods managed. And that's an idea that I did not expect at all. And speaking of slight changes, I also have to talk about the Cyclops flashback with Annabeth, because I have some thoughts. But first, let's talk about the book version of this flashback. In the book, Annabeth tells Percy the story of why she hates Cyclopses, and it's actually because of something that happened when she was on the way to Camp Half-Blood with Luke, Thalia, and Grover. Grover had accidentally led them into a Cyclops lair, and Thalia, Luke, and Grover got captured. The Cyclopses mimicked Luke and Thalia's voices so that Annabeth would fall for their trap, and it worked. Annabeth thought she was saving her friends, but she realized too late that it was all a plan. However, Annabeth refused to be captured and stabbed the Cyclops on the foot with the dagger Luke had given her. We actually saw this dagger already in the show multiple times, and it's very, very important to the future books, so I'm kind of surprised that they haven't said anything about it yet. I actually made a video before on Annabeth's knife, so you can check it out if you want more info. But going back, after Annabeth stabbed the Cyclops, a fight broke out, and Thalia managed to free herself along with Grover and Luke, and the group eventually escaped. Now, the show was able to, well, show the Cyclops incident, but in a very different way, and let me explain. So remember the bracelet Luke gave Annabeth in the first scene? Well, in the show, Annabeth lost it midway into the flashbacks, and she actually tried to go back for it later on. Because of this, the Cyclops managed to corner her, and Annabeth was the one who was captured here, while in the book, Thalia, Grover, and Luke were the ones captured. The show also highlighted a very different detail here in this scene. Thalia saves Annabeth from the Cyclopses. And just a quick side note, I love how consistently brave and strong Thalia has been in this episode. That's exactly how she was in the books as well, and I just love Thalia's moments so far. Like, I'm so excited to see more of her in the next season. But after Thalia defeated the monsters, present-day Annabeth tells Percy that Thalia made a very big decision that changed everything. Thalia decided to finally take Grover's offer of Camp Half-Blood, and what prompted that was because of Annabeth's kidnapping. Thalia and Luke went to Camp Half-Blood only because it promised the safety that a young Annabeth desperately needed, and this choice was something Annabeth was guilty about, because this eventually led to Thalia's death, which we almost got a scene of. We see Luke, Annabeth, Thalia, and Grover about to head into camp when Furies appear to attack them. The Furies being the monsters Hades sent is a detail that the show hinted on in the first season, as we learned that Alecto, or one of the Furies, was actually part of the group that attacked Annabeth and the rest. It's honestly a pretty cool added detail that makes sense because the Furies are creatures loyal to Hades, which is why we see them here. However, I kind of wish that they also added even more monsters in this scene. Like, the books pretty much told us that Thalia fought monster after monster to save everyone. So I think adding more than just a couple of Furies would really highlight just how brave and strong Thalia really was in that moment. We would also understand that she was completely outnumbered, because that's exactly what Hades wanted. Hades wanted to kill Thalia, which is why he sent those monsters. So I wish that they showed more of them here to really show how intense this scene was. So, in summary, the show did a great job with the flashbacks. It's nice to see Luke and Annabeth bond over the bracelet, and seeing an edited Cyclops scene was a pretty cool addition. But I also wish that they went with what the book already gave us. Instead of the bracelet, I wish we got the scene with Luke giving Annabeth her bronze dagger. This knife is a very important part of the series, and it would make sense to add it here because we always see Annabeth with this weapon already. Also, in the books, we know that Annabeth was given this knife on the night she met Luke and Thalia, so I think showing this scene instead of the bracelet would be even more impactful. Going over the Cyclops flashback, I think making Annabeth be the one captured is an interesting idea, but it also took away a pretty brave moment of Annabeth standing up against the Cyclops, even though she was just 7 years old. Like, don't get me wrong, I get that they tried to highlight just how terrifying it must be for a young Annabeth to be kidnapped by a Cyclops, therefore solidifying her fear of Cyclopses forever, but some part of me wishes that they kept the original story. But anyway, let's go to the main plot with Percy, Annabeth, and Tyson. Like in the book, they arrive on an island, but unlike in the book, Percy and Tyson are the ones that have a nice talk instead of Percy and Annabeth. As I mentioned earlier, the book had Percy send Tyson to buy donuts, so that Percy and Annabeth can talk in private, but the show changed it up so that Annabeth left them to talk, which is also why we see Annabeth in the underground area in the first scene. Either way though, it's a pretty fun scene with Percy and Tyson. The two of them were goofing around, and it was honestly sweet to see, because they're bonding like brothers, and I think the show needs more lighthearted moments like these. Like, what I also really noticed in the show is that it feels too serious sometimes, that I think the episode titles don't really match the tone of the show. These funny and hinged titles were perfect in the books, because the chapters had its fair share of serious and funny moments, so I think the show should really break the ice once in a while, especially since Percy was always very funny without meaning to in the books. And I know Walker has it in him to be funny. Like, seriously, just watch the Adam Project where he was in before. So I guess we just had to set the tone better in the show. After this scene, we see Clarisse arrive with her men, and they made a very interesting change. They made Percy fight Clarisse in single combat, and this never happened in the book. The book just made Clarisse take them aboard the ship, so seeing Percy and Clarisse fight is pretty new. Also, this fight was actually teased multiple times in the Percy series Insta page, so finally seeing it here was really satisfying. The fight was pretty good, but I honestly wish it lasted a bit longer. And that's something the show keeps doing. The fight keeps ending quickly, and I hope they change this in the future. Overall though, Clarisse lets them aboard the ship because Annabeth killed some of Clarisse's crew, and Clarisse soon realized that she actually needed Percy, Annabeth, and Tyson for this quest. We soon arrive to the scene with Percy, Annabeth, and Clarisse discussing the situation, and I love the nod they made to Odysseus, or the main character of the Greek poem The Odyssey. When writing The Sea of Monsters, Riordan, or the author, took a lot of inspiration from The Odyssey, which showcases the quest of Odysseus trying to get back home to his wife Penelope after years in the Trojan War. Odysseus encounters many obstacles like the creatures in the Sea of Monsters, the sorceress Circe, and even other monsters like sirens or the Cyclops Polyphemus. All of these creatures are also obstacles Percy and the gang encounter throughout this book and season, so discussing what Odysseus did here was a pretty nice touch. I also have to give a shout out to the Clarisse and Percy scene, wherein Clarisse actually kind of opens up to Percy. She tells Percy about the prophecy she was given by the Oracle, and we finally hear the last line, "and fail without friends to fly home alone." They actually cut this last part from the previous episode, so that's why I wanted to point it out. This moment also softens Clarisse quite a bit, because previously, we've seen Clarisse and Percy always argue with one another, and having this kind of heart-to-heart moment improved their relationship by a mile. And speaking of sweet moments, I also had to give a shout out to a small but sweet Percy and Annabeth moment. We see Annabeth and Percy talk, and Annabeth opens up about her past, which is why we got the flashbacks I already went through earlier. Annabeth reflects on what Luke said in the previous episode, as Luke called Annabeth out and said that Annabeth knew nothing about Thalia, because Annabeth was only with them for 2 months. This truly hurt Annabeth, as she questioned what she knew about her life with Luke and Thalia. Annabeth also highlights how Luke was right. She was only with them for 2 months, and how would you know people in such a short time? But Percy counters this, and says, "It only took me 2 days to realize just how special you are." This is not from the book at all, so it surprised me, and it made me smile now, but it's honestly a sweet nod to Percabeth. From the previous season, Percy and Annabeth are growing closer than ever, and this would only continue in the later seasons and books. And then, we finally get to the highlight of the episode. Clarisse's ship arrived in the Sea of Monsters, and Scylla and Charybdis attacked. Scylla's tentacles attacked the crew, and it was a chilling moment, especially when this captain, whose name I kind of forgot, so sorry about that, but this captain stares into Clarisse before getting taken away, and that made Clarisse steer the ship away from Scylla, but into Charybdis, and we actually got to see some parts of this monster, as it tries to swallow Clarisse's ship. And honestly, this entire sequence was really good, and the resolution was pretty interesting. We see them use Hermes' flask of wind, and it floats the boat out of the ocean, which is a really wild idea that I didn't expect, because they didn't really use this in the book. Like, this chapter ended with the ship exploding, and Annabeth and Percy only survived because they managed to get an emergency raft and they got out of there. And what's even crazier is that the episode cuts off once Clarisse's ship is flying in the air. Like, I was so surprised that the episode ended there, because the book's chapter ended very differently. As the ship exploded, Percy was tossed into the water with the knowledge that Tyson was still inside the ship. This was a very serious moment in the book, as Percy was filled with so much grief and guilt. And I'll read the last line of this chapter to you guys to really highlight what I mean. The last thing I remember was sinking in a burning sea, knowing that Tyson was gone forever, and wishing I were able to drown. Percy was so devastated at the end of this chapter, so seeing the episode cut off here is very surprising. I'm not really sure if they still include Tyson's quote-unquote death scene in the next episode, so I guess we have to wait and see. But for what it's worth, I think this episode was really good, especially with the flashbacks. I really like those scenes, and overall, I'd rate this episode a 9.8 out of 10. Like, for me, it's tied up there with the first 2 episodes of the show. A pretty good one, and I'm excited for the next ones to come. So how about you? What do you think of this episode? Let me know in the comments down below.